to do it, how to bring the energy. It's great walk-on music, right?
Great walk-on music and a beautiful venue.
Yeah, seriously. So folks, if you heard those introductions and you're wondering right now, I wonder which one's Neil and which one's Jessie, I'm just going to solve that for you. I am Jessie Hempel. I am host of LinkedIn's flagship podcast. It's called Hello Monday. It is not entirely queer. The fact that we have so many queer and queer adjacent guests is just coincidence. I don't know. But I am queer, and I am a huge fan of lesbians who tech. And thank you. All right. And I invited here today Neil Blumenthal, one of the founders of one of my favorite companies, Warby Parker.
Thank you.
To talk a little bit about a few things. We're going to hear 3 things over the next half hour, so make sure to take notes. We're going to hear a little bit about what it means to start and build a company around purpose, right? Because purpose is so critical to why we show up every day. Whatever we're doing, it is critical to the organizations that we're part of. We're going to hear a little bit about how you stay with purpose over time, because Warby Parker's not young anymore.
Oh, we're like full adolescents, if not older.
I think you're even older than adolescent,
Oh, man.
Just saying. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be like a founder in 2024 right now, because Neil, you are also an investor and you spend a lot of time with them. So with that, Neil, why don't you give us a little bit of a background on how Warby Parker came to be?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. We started Warby Parker to solve our own problem as consumers, walking to an optical shop, getting excited about a pair of glasses, walking out and feeling like we've been ripped off. And I think a lot of businesses, right, are formed to solve a particular problem. Advice I always give to aspiring entrepreneurs is every day write down a few frustrations that you have. By the end of the week, you probably have a dozen. At the end of the month, several dozens. One of those may have a solution that can be a viable business. As we started to sort of look into solving this problem, we got more and more excited about the business idea. And then the question was, what could we build that would also keep us sort of engaged over the long run? And that's where really like purpose and impact came in. But the basic premise was...
I'm going to stop you here, Neil,
Yeah.
because you keep saying we, and I want to make sure that our crowd understands who your founders were and the moment in time that you found yourself. You were looking for a company to start, right?
Yeah, we were at business school. We were getting our MBAs at Wharton. One of my co-founders, Dave, had just lost an iPhone in the seat pocket of an airplane where he was traveling right before school started. And it was going to cost $800 to replace a pair of glasses, yet this iPhone, which was, this was 2008, so the iPhone had just come out and could do all these magical things. Glasses were invented, about 1,000 years ago, and yet, cost more than this magical device. My other co-founder and classmate, Andy Hunt, sort of was wondering, why is nobody selling glasses online? This was a period where companies like Zappos, Blue Nile were making news for selling footwear and sneakers and engagement rings and jewelry online, categories people didn't think could be sold online. And similarly, our other friend Jeff had a pair of like raggedy old glasses that needed to be replaced. And I previously had run a nonprofit that would train low-income women in parts of the world where people are living on less than $4 a day to start their own businesses, giving vision screenings and selling glasses in their communities. So I knew a little bit about the optical industry and glasses, so we got to talking and thought, maybe we can work to solve this problem.
Well, so I want to actually bring us to the idea of the problem and your ideal around what a good business would be. This idea of doing good, it sounded like a promise that Silicon Valley was like all behind 20 years ago, but now perhaps we're a little bit less naive and we understand that business is business. That has never been your opinion about business, right?
Yeah, no, I think we've believed that you can have your cake and eat it too, that you can do well and do good. We thought it was an inherent good to make a quality product and provide exceptional value, so charge $95 for glasses instead of $400. But we also wanted to sort of solve this issue of about 1 billion people around the planet don't have glasses. And we think that's crazy. Again, glasses were invented 1,000 years ago, so we're failing as a species if we can't make an innovation and a technological advancement like glasses available to every human on Earth. So we thought, well, what could we do through business to help solve this broader problem? And we defined our mission as vision for all, and we mean that figuratively and literally. Literally, how do we provide the tools to see? Figuratively, how do we serve as a business that inspires other businesses to do good? And in the early days, as we were working through our business plan, we baked in that for every pair of glasses we'd sell, we distribute one to someone in need. And that was after sort of thinking through, there's a million different mechanisms to do this. We could give a percent of profits, a percent of revenue. I think the thought was that those could be manipulated at some point, especially if we didn't control the company. Somebody could always come in and change it, whereas the thought is, if this was tied to our branding, and everybody knew that for every pair of glasses we sold, we distributed one to someone in need, that you would do a lot of damage, perhaps irreparable damage to the brand to stop that. And ultimately, our goal was to get glasses on faces, because we knew that had the outcomes that we wanted. Better educational outcomes, the ability to earn a livelihood, and so on.
Okay, so this sort of branding move, which was to sell the idea that for every pair of glasses sold, a pair of glasses would be given away. We're going to talk a second about the branding, but before we get there, do you still do that?
We still do it. We've distributed over 15 million pairs of glasses to people in need around the world. Thank you.
Yeah, that does get a clap, y'all.
As we've scaled, one of the things that's been excited is that we've been able to do it in more expensive, more challenging environments. And what we mean by that is that we actually have gone into like New York City public schools. And I say more challenging because you have to like work through bureaucracy, for example. And there's more regulation distributing glasses here in the US. So there's about 3 million kids across the country that don't have glasses and need them, and we're now working in 42 cities in school districts to provide vision screenings. If a kid then fails that, to provide comprehensive eye exams, and then glasses. And one thing that I take a lot of pride in is that the students get to choose their glasses. Because we know that as much as this is a health product, it's a fashion accessory, and the kids need to have agency and take pride in what they're wearing, or they won't wear them, and then we won't have, again, the educational impact that we seek.
So I want to go way back to the very beginning and talk about your perception of the role of brand as you started the company, because it was sort of front and center as you got started, right?
Yeah, so, one of the first sort of eyewear brands at scale in the last, probably 40 plus years. The last one was Oakley. Before that, the largest Ray-Ban, right? It's been around since, I think, the 50s or 60s. And, again, recognizing the market that we were in, optical and eyewear, that's got to convey some credibility from a health standpoint, that is a fashion object that is so tied to one's identity. It's often the first thing that people see. We wanted to build a brand. We also thought that building a lifestyle brand created barriers to entry from a competitive standpoint. We thought that was really a reason for being that could always guide our strategy. We want to work for brands. Brands have impact on culture and society. So we spent literally over a year writing and working through our brand architecture, that we stand for fun, creativity, doing good in the world, working through a brand identity. We went through 2,000 different names And finally, when my co-founder Dave was visiting an exhibit at the New York Public Library on Jack Kerouac, and there were these two characters, Warby Pepper and Zag Parker, that we then sort of came up with the name.
And as I understand it, you still stand by that, and new employees, they get copies of those books, right?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is so critical to sort of building an authentic brand, especially in the age of the internet, is that you have to live that brand every single day and live those values. So as I think about what's the key to long-term success, it's people and culture, and how do we put ourselves out there so people are self-selecting to come and work at Warby Parker because of our brand, because of our values. Dave and I, who are still the co-CEOs of the company, still interview everybody at headquarters, all of our store managers. We now have over 260 stores across the country, the leadership of our manufacturing facilities, of our customer service teams. We now have about 4,000 employees. And the reason why we do that is because we want to make sure that people coming into Warby know that we really care, and we're looking for folks whose values are already aligned with ours.
Neil, is this idea around purpose more important for your employees or more important for your customers?
One of the reasons why we did sort of buy a pair, give a pair, was to make it easy and digestible for customers. And we think that that's important, but on the hierarchy of their sort of purchase calculus, it's certainly not as important as sort of style and price and quality and convenience. We think it's important, and we think it makes people more likely to talk about us and sort of love their glasses and the brand, but we're not sure that it's moving the needle significantly from a customer standpoint. But certainly from a people standpoint, it's the number one reason why people come and work for us and stay working at Warby.
Y'all, I love this right now. I feel like we're having like a turn in the weather as we sit on the stage. There's just like gusts coming from behind, perhaps bringing rain. I feel like it's a great opportunity for a bit of a metaphor here. Over the course of growing a company, unexpected things come up. The equivalent of rainstorms, I don't know, pandemics.
That is for sure.
How does purpose play when suddenly things get really hard?
I think that's sort of right. Values are just words on paper until you really need to sort of act on them. And there were a few things that we wanted to do in building the company, really articulate our values, make sure that we were building a culture that when the time came and we had to make tough decisions, that we would be able to do those. Certainly during COVID was one of those times, right, that tested everybody across the world. We were one of the first national retailers. It was effectively us and Apple that closed all of our stores. I remember it was Friday the 13th, a very ominous day in
March 13th.
And we did that based on the information that we had, that especially being here in New York, they were starting to get sort of runs on hospitals. So the thought was, if businesses and if our stores, if we were able to close those and people could work from home, or in the case of our stores, they couldn't work from home, but if we could continue to pay them, we'd be living our values. But we would hopefully slow the spread, the progression of COVID, and give our health workers and our hospital system sort of a moment to breathe and treat those people with sort of severe symptoms. That was hard. It wasn't clear that the federal government was going to come in and sort of offer a stimulus and money to employees and citizens and businesses. But we thought that it was the right thing to do, and we were sort of in an executive meeting. It was like, okay, this is the right thing to do. We're going to do it. How are we going to make this work financially as well? And sometimes, you need to prepare to be able to live your values, and some of that is that we always made sure that the company was well capitalized, so that we could sort of go through a rough spot. But yeah, we closed all our stores. We continued to pay our employees because it was the right thing to do.
Talk a little bit about that. Talk about how you manage the companies so that you can continue to have enough control to make those decisions according to your values rather than say what the public market might demand or investors.
So there's this old saying that you get the investors that you deserve. So one is just communicating what we believe and how we're going to run the business. The second is, are there certain legal structures and governance structures we can put in place? So we're a public benefit corporation. It's a legal structure that's a relatively new legal structure.
Pause a second here. Show of hands in the audience. How many of you have heard of a public benefit corporation before? So we got some folks. How about B Corps? Anybody heard of B Corps before? So you're both, right?
We're both. So we're a certified B Corp. We were sort of early in that journey, and right, that's the equivalent of like a LEED certification for impact and doing good. And then we partnered actually with the founders of B Corp, of B Labs, the nonprofit that administers it, to go down and speak to lawmakers and the Chancery Court in the state of Delaware to advocate for the creation of a legal entity that would enshrine the ability to be stakeholder-centric. And that law ended up passing, and then we, proudly it changed from being a C Corp to a public benefit corporation. And what this legal sort of structure enables companies to do is balance the interests of stakeholders. So, right, a traditional C Corp, you have the primacy of the shareholder, and everything has to be done within the interests of the shareholder. Now, you can make some justifications that treating customers right, treating employees right is in the best interests of shareholders, which I firmly believe, but you still have to make that argument. With a public benefit corporation, you sort of describe a mission, and you can balance the interests of stakeholders. So we can balance the interests of shareholders, employees, customers, then the community at large when we're making, important corporate and governance decisions.
So you're one of the very few publicly traded companies that is also a public benefit corporation, right? Does that make it more difficult to be successful?
I don't think so. I think it's a superpower of ours, and I firmly believe that it helps us attract and retain talent. We now have over 260 stores across the country. It means that we're hiring a lot of optometrists. There's over 45,000 optical shops across the U.S., which is kind of crazy. It's a massive category, about $70 billion. But there's only 1,800 optometrists that graduate every year. And it's easier for us to hire, world-class eye doctors because they want to work for a mission-driven company. So, we think that it makes us better.
So Neil, I'm very interested in your personal path because in the many years that I've been a tech reporter, I often see people found companies and then at a certain point leave. And you've been with Warby Parker a long time and have no plans to leave. When you began this journey, did you envision it this way?
I think we designed it in a way that would motivate us every single day. And a lot of that is, right, can you build something that's going to scale? Because scale means bigger impact. Can you do something in a way that is going to have broad impact? And I feel like I'm having a lot of impact every single day. And so that's what motivates me. I had a meeting today, and we were talking through, how do we scale Pupils Project, right? Our program to go into schools, provide eye exams, and distribute free glasses. Right, that energizes me to have sort of a strategy like that. We're now ensuring that every public school student in New York City, there's 1.1 million kids in New York City public schools, every kindergartner and first grader, right, are eligible for this program, and they get sort of the glasses and the eye exams that they need. We do this in Baltimore. We do this across the country. And we recently commissioned a study, and we found that a pair of glasses is the equivalent of 3 months of additional schooling. Right? This is one of the most effective educational interventions that somebody could have, more effective than private tutoring or extending the school day. So that energizes me and makes me want to do this, for the next decade and to solve this issue for the 3 million, students across the country.
And you believe, to be clear, that business, and in fact your business, is actually the best path forward to address this social problem.
Absolutely. One of my first jobs was I was working, and this is how I got into sort of the world of eye care and eyewear. I was working for a super dynamic eye doctor named Jordan Cassellow. When he would backpack across the world, he'd often see that nobody was wearing glasses. The scale was so big that he knew that you couldn't just raise a bunch of money to give away a bunch of glasses for free, because that wasn't going to be a sustainable solution, right? For every pair you gave to somebody, you would have to, find more to give, and people's prescriptions change over time. So how do you create sort of a sustainable model? And he had this idea to train folks in the communities to sell the glasses at an affordable price, right? There's a difference between an emerging and developing economy than a crisis situation like a refugee camp or something where you want to give stuff away for free, but for the bulk of humanity, right, they're living in sort of a emerging economy. So if you could create a livelihood by providing glasses to somebody, that would help solve the problem, not just today, but next week, next year, and so on. So he had this idea to train low-income women, and he wanted to focus on women in particular because all these international development studies showed that when women have access to capital, they tended to use it on health and education of children and other people in the community. So you'd have these great multiplier effects. And I got really excited about this, and I moved down to El Salvador to work on the pilot program, and then ended up expanding it to over 20 countries around the world, set up programs in India and Bangladesh and Ghana and elsewhere, and saw the power of a pair of glasses to transform someone's life.
I love this part of the story, Neil, because it shows the richness with which what we do builds on itself, right? In some ways, that first move, you didn't know exactly where it was going, but it took you to the second move. The second move in your career wouldn't have come without that first move. And several years ago, you started an investing fund with a number of your friends and co-founders, actually. And I wonder if you might speak a little bit to your role as an investor now and meeting founders right now.
Sure. On the side of a venture fund that invests in seed and Series A, early stage companies, it's called Good Friends because there are a few of us that started together, and we're good friends, and we want to be good friends to founders. And I find that it helps keep me sharp to be learning about new business models and different sort of emerging software and technologies. And it's exciting and rewarding for me also to pay it forward. There were so many people that were so helpful in the early days of Warby Parker that there's some learnings. I want to pay those forward. And it's interesting, in those early days of Warby, we would call up people, and people were so generous with their time, and it was transformative. When we started Warby, we thought that we were going to be able to sell glasses for $50 instead of $500. And we met with a marketing professor at Wharton, and he said, you know what, that's not going to work. No one's going to believe that something can be as good as a $500 product if you're selling it for a tenth of the price. Price is the biggest indicator of quality. Plus, whatever you think your cost of goods are, that's going to be higher, and you're going to have no money to market your business with. Sure enough, he was right. Right as we got into the weeds of manufacturing the quality of eyewear that we wanted, that wouldn't have worked. We surveyed potential customers, and the willingness to purchase actually increased with price up until $100, at which point it plateaued and then came down. So that helped us with pricing, and we just have so many stories about this, how people sort of generously, shared feedback. And I think starting a business is an emotional roller coaster, right? You walk into a meeting, sometimes really excited, then you get some feedback, and sometimes you feel like the dumbest person on the planet, but ultimately, right, that feedback makes you better and better.
Well, so I'm curious, so many of the people in this audience are founders themselves or are considering it down the line. And I have two questions for you on that note. The first is, it's been a while since you were in the earliest days of your life as a founder. Now you're talking to people who are in that phase. What's different about founding a company in 2024 from when you did it?
I think there are a few things that are different. One is that the cost to start a business has continued to decline, which I think is great, but that also means increased competition. So, right, there are different software packages. Like if you want to go to e-commerce, for example, right, you now have Shopify. We didn't have that when we were working on the business in 2008 and then launching in 2010. We've gone through a venture cycle. So, right, those 2010s were glorious from a fundraising perspective, and then, right, the last couple of years have been quite choppy. The other thing that we've sort of seen is a lot of tech investors sort of retreat to really focus on hard tech and pioneering tech, and in particular AI, and maybe do invest less in sort of tech-adjacent businesses like Warby,
Sure.
right? We always positioned ourselves as a tech-enabled brand. So the question always is, as you're building a business, is what do you need to know to invest more in time and money into the idea? And right, the less capital you use in the beginning, like the less risk you're taking on. And I think you could probably do that farther today than you could sort of a decade ago. But I also think versus just 5 years ago, sort of that threshold for raising capital is harder.
Yeah. We got 26 minutes into this conversation before you said AI.
Yeah. My investor relations folks are like, you need to say AI more and more because the street really loves that term as well.
They do, and I have to wonder if there isn't just a big bubble in investing in AI.
You would have to assume so. I mean, it's going to be transformative, but everybody and their mother, claiming to be doing AI.
And that's the way that technology's investing cycles work.
Right,
But
like
listen,
lemmings flying together and then falling off
down
the
we
cliff.
go and up again. One more very important question for you, and that is that we know that we would love to see more diversity among young founders, and raising money in particular is so hard. How do you make sure you're seeing a diversity of founders and a diversity of ideas?
Yeah, we make sure that we surround ourselves with a diversity of people from different backgrounds that are going to come up with different ideas, right? Most of our deal flow is introductions or gathering at conferences or, going down to Wharton to speak there on Monday, and you sort of use Warby Parker as a case study to sort of illustrate some marketing events and topics. So, we're trying to sort of meet as many different people as possible. The most important thing that I can do is at Warby sort of create a diverse and inclusive team, because, right, a lot of these introductions are also coming from either existing or former employees, and we take a lot of pride when we have our former employees or folks leave Warby to go on and start businesses, and we've had quite a few, including Away and a few other brands and businesses.
Well, Neil, thank you so much for sharing so much about how Warby Parker began, but also about the journey of what it is to start and grow a business. And we did it all before the rain.
Victory.
Thank you. All right, everyone.
Thank you.